When I saw your tool, I couldn't help myself, and I immediately put everything in the back. Hello, today I'm going to share with you a story of betrayal that changed my life completely. I played with my stepfather's feelings until he fell in love with me, and in the end, I used this as part of my revenge against my mother. She deserved it all, and now I'm going to reveal it to you. Don't miss it, because this story will take everyone by surprise. My name is Elizabeth. I'm 24 years old and I live in Brownsville with my mother, in a simple little house that my father left us when he passed away. My father was a teacher and left us suddenly, victim of fatal pneumonia, just over 6 years ago. His departure was a hard blow for our family, but no one felt it more than my mother. She became completely unstructured, a bit crazy, and couldn't cope with her grief in a healthy way. The situation became even more complicated when, shortly after his death, she discovered that he was having affairs with other women. That destroyed her for good. Since then, she has been in a constant state of nervousness and anger, cursing my father's memory almost every day. I, who have always been very close to my father, couldn't accept her attitude. As far as I'm concerned, there's no point in reliving this hurt. He's gone. I defended his memory because, despite everything, he was my father. And that was the last straw for my mother. If before she took all her anger out on him, now I've become the target. I'm the new victim of her frustration and anger, and things in the house have never been the same since. Everything got worse when my mother became jealous of my love life. I was about to start dating a friend from college. Everything seemed to be going well, until one day I came home and found the two of them in the kitchen, almost kissing. At that moment, the shock was immense. I confronted them both immediately, my mother and him. But they both denied what was about to happen. But I knew what I saw. I'm not stupid. She did it on purpose. She wanted me to feel what it was like to be betrayed. Time passed, but the hurt remained. In one of our most intense fights, she finally admitted what I already suspected. She told me that she had done it with my ex-boyfriend to teach me a lesson so that I would stop defending cheaters. And of course, she was referring to my father, who, even though he was dead, was still the center of her anger and resentment. At that moment, I realized that everything she did was just to hurt me, to make me feel the same way she thought she felt about my father. It was one of our worst fights, the kind that left deep scars. After that argument, our relationship fell apart for good. We only spoke to each other as much as was necessary, as if we were two strangers living under the same roof. After that, my mother changed completely. She started going out much more often, taking exaggerated care of her appearance, doing her nails, fixing her hair, dressing like she was still in her 30s. It was as if she desperately wanted to erase the time that had passed and live a life of limitless freedom. But the worst thing was her complete lack of responsibility. Before she started dating my stepfather, who I'm still going to tell you who he is, she brought home various men she'd met at clubs and parties, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Without worrying about me or what I thought, she brought them home to sleep, night after night. And I, alone in my room, wondered where the mother I knew had ended up. The house, which had once been a safe and familiar place, became a scene of chaos and total fighting. More and more, she was living a life that didn't match up to her responsibilities as a mother, and I increasingly felt distant and lost in this new reality. Now let's talk about my stepfather. He's much younger than my mother. He's only 34, while she's already 52. They met at work, they work in the same company, but I only found out they were dating when my mother told me he was coming to live with us. When she told me that, it was like a bombshell. I was shocked, because I didn't even know she was in a relationship, let alone with whom. And now, out of the blue, she just decides that he's going to live here at home? That was another intense discussion we had. I said at the time, "If you put a man in the house, I'll leave immediately." I couldn't understand how she thought she could do something like that without telling me first. I didn't even know the man's name. But the more I complained, the more she seemed indifferent. It was as if she didn't care about my opinion, as if she wanted me to leave the house so she could live as she pleased. It was at that moment that I realized that perhaps this had been her plan all along, for me to leave so that she could have everything, without having to deal with me. But in the midst of all the nervousness, I changed my mind. I wasn't going to let her throw me out of my own house without a fight. I stopped arguing and went to my room, but the anger only grew inside me. I kept thinking, how could anyone have the nerve to do that? To arrive out of the blue and tell you that a stranger is going to live in your house? As if I should just accept it with open arms? Alone, in my room, I could feel the anger boiling up. Every tear that fell reminded me of all the fights, all the suffering she had caused me over the years. It was at that moment that I made a decision. If she thought she could live her life without caring about anything, then I was going to do the same. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I decided that I would take revenge on my mother for everything she had put me through. I was going to seduce her new boyfriend, my stepfather. After a few days, the Blessed One finally moved in. I was in my room, fiddling with my cell phone and talking to a friend, when I started to hear voices and laughter coming from the living room. I wanted to stay in the room and only come out when they were asleep, avoiding any contact. But then I remembered my plan, the one I had already devised, to seduce my mother's new boyfriend. There was just one detail. He had to be ugly and strange. But I quickly discarded that idea. After all, knowing my mother, she would never get involved with someone who wasn't the least bit attractive. On purpose, I changed the clothes I was wearing for something more provocative. I put on tight gym shorts and a white blouse with an eye-catching neckline. I tied my hair up casually and put on a bright red lipstick, ready to put my plan into practice. With everything ready, I left the bedroom and walked towards the living room. At a glance, I saw that her boyfriend was already sitting back on the sofa. Before going over to him, I passed by the kitchen, where my mother was preparing something to eat. As soon as she saw me, she immediately lectured me, asking me to behave and not be rude to my new stepfather. She also said that she didn't want any fights that day, complaining that she was tired of me being a spoiled, whiny woman. Shaking my head, I promised I wouldn't do anything wrong, even though I knew my real plan was something else. I took the opportunity to ask for his name, but she just told me to go over and introduce myself, mentioning that his name was Jackson. I grabbed a strawberry from the fridge and headed for the living room. As I passed the sofa, I stopped in front of him and held out my hand to introduce myself. He stood up quickly and shook my hand gently and calmly, saying, "Nice to meet you. My name is Jackson." I smiled slightly and introduced myself. I then sat down on the sofa next to him. He immediately commented, "You look a lot like your mother. It's impossible to deny that you are mother and daughter." Inside, I was very nervous about him comparing me to that insufferable woman, but I kept smiling. I had thought he would be an ugly man, but I was completely wrong. Jackson was a bit shy, polite, a little chubby, but with a charming face, wearing glasses and a well-kept beard. He caught my attention immediately. To break the ice, he started asking me questions about my life, wanting to know where I worked and if I was studying. I replied that I was in college, and the conversation flowed. I seized the moment and threw a provocative question across the table, asking if he and my mother were thinking of getting married, since he was about to move into our house. Jackson smiled a little awkwardly and explained, "Actually, I'm not moving in with you. My apartment is almost ready to be handed over. I bought it a year ago and they're going to deliver it as soon as possible. As my rental contract expired, it didn't make sense to sign up for another year, so I'm only going to spend a few weeks here until the keys are handed over." I got even more nervous at that moment. Why hadn't my mother told me the truth that he would only be here for a few weeks? Why cause such a fuss? But I put that aside and decided to put my plan into action. I took a strawberry in my hand and began to bite into it in a slightly more provocative way, trying to stir his imagination. I soon realized that Jackson was looking at me shyly, trying to disguise his curiosity about what I was doing. Unfortunately, my mother entered the room just in time, bringing them a plate of cold cuts. As soon as she arrived, she asked him what he thought of her daughter and told him that I was a bit rude, but easy to get along with. Jackson, polite as ever, defended me, saying that I was very receptive and that we'd even had a good chat. As he said this, I noticed that my mother gave me a look that seemed to know I was up to something, and commented that there were days when I was quiet. Determined not to let the situation get away from me, I got up from the sofa and headed towards my bedroom, but I passed right by him, rolling over slightly. I noticed that he caught a glimpse, and that made me smile with satisfaction. As soon as I entered my room, I started laughing to myself, realizing how easy it was to fool a man. All I needed was a little charm and a dash of daring. I knew I was just starting to play my game, and the fun was just beginning. Before continuing with this real account of infidelity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. I left the two of them there talking, enjoying their moment of intimacy. I left the room a few times, just to check on the situation, pretending I didn't care, while I waited for the perfect opportunity to act again. However, that day, my mother wouldn't leave him alone, so I had to restrain myself and just watched from afar. The days went by and I hardly got to see him. As he and my mother worked for the same company, they went home and back together. Every time I thought I had a chance, my mother would show up, as if she really knew about my plan. It was frustrating. I decided to wait until the situation calmed down, hoping that she would forget my intentions and believe that everything was going well, as it should be. And indeed, it was. With Jackson at home, my mother seemed to have forgotten about me. The fights that used to be frequent had subsided, and she was so involved with her new boyfriend that it seemed like I didn't matter anymore. This gave me an idea that maybe, just maybe, I had a chance of putting my plan into practice. Time was in my favor, and I was determined to win Jackson over, even if it meant waiting a little longer. On an ordinary day, I woke up as usual, wearing tight, comfortable pajamas, the kind I love to wear to bed. I got out of bed and went to the bathroom. When I came out, I was startled to bump into Jackson. I almost fell backwards, but he quickly caught me in his arms, preventing me from falling and hurting myself. I thanked him, and we laughed about the situation, breaking the ice a little. As we talked, I began to wonder why he was there, since he and my mother were supposed to be at work at that time. But as we talked, I noticed that his eyes wouldn't move away from my pajamas. It was as if he was completely hypnotized, trapped in that vision. Knowing that my plan was moving slowly, I decided to be much bolder. In the middle of our conversation, I asked, with a smile on my face, if he liked my pajamas, while I smoothed my hands down my body, as if I wanted him to really notice everything that was there in front of him, without missing a thing. The tension in the air increased, and I could feel that there was something different about the way he looked at me. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, and I was determined to enjoy every second of it. He then answered me in a relaxed way, complimenting my pajamas, saying that they were nice and looked great on me. He asked if I trained to maintain those curves, commenting that it was difficult to find a body like that in person, saying that he only saw women like that on social media. I could tell he was a little embarrassed and tried to change the subject, explaining that he hadn't gone to work because he'd taken the day off to get the key to his house and sort out some matters, such as documents and licenses. I didn't care about the keys and immediately turned my attention to my body and decided this time to be more daring. So you watch beautiful women on your cell phone? And has my mother ever caught you in the act? She's very jealous, you know. The provocation caused a smile to appear on his face, and I could feel the tension in the air increase. Jackson looked a little surprised, but his expression said he was enjoying himself. This exchange of words was exactly the direction I wanted, and the atmosphere between us was changing, creating a more spicy, flirtatious mood that I was eager to explore. Before continuing with this true account of infidelity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. My stepfather then replied that he couldn't see anything near my mother because she was a bit jealous and a bit crazy, as he put it. So I jokingly asked him to keep it a secret and commented that I was great at this sort of thing. To spice up the conversation even more, I turned around provocatively and asked if my body really looked like those women he saw on his cell phone. He looked me up and down, and I could feel the tension in the air. When he said that I was even prettier than them, much prettier, it brought a sincere smile to my face. I asked him if he really thought so, and to tease him a little, I joked that I also thought he was handsome and even attractive. Without hesitation, I added, "If you weren't my stepfather, I'd kiss you easily." His expression changed, and I could see a mixture of surprise and interest in his eyes. Then he widened his eyes and asked, "Seriously? Would you stay with me if I were single?" I answered quickly without hesitation, Yes, no problem at all. You're definitely my kind of guy. I took the opportunity to say that I didn't have a boyfriend and that I hadn't been with anyone for a long time, since I was always at college studying. I added that I didn't have much time to meet people. I concluded by saying that despite being alone, it was getting harder and harder to deal with. I looked at him with a mischievous smile and said, "You know, it makes me want to do certain things." The teasing tone in my voice was clear, and I could see that he was intrigued. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and I knew I was stirring his feelings in a way that could take us to a new level. He was bolder than I'd expected, and that helped me more than I'd imagined. In fact, that conversation was the starting point for everything. After what he heard, Jackson asked if he could help me in any way, saying that he was there to support me in whatever I needed. I looked him right in the eye and, with a teasing, bulging smile, said that he could help relieve me, that I was tense and needed a massage. He smiled back and agreed, but made a point of telling me that it had to be before my mother arrived, so as not to make a nuisance of myself. I told him to relax and that we'd do it right away. I took him by the arm and we headed for the living room. When we got there, I lay down on the sofa and asked him to start by massaging my feet. Jackson began to massage my feet while looking at me in a different way, as if he already knew what I was trying to do. It was clear that this man, who had previously been shy and bashful, was now loosening up, showing a confidence I hadn't expected. I knew we were about to cross a line of no return. After a few minutes, I asked him to take the massage up a notch, as my legs were aching. His touch was relaxing, but the tension between us grew by the second. I couldn't take it any longer and bluntly said, "Kiss me now." Those words were exactly what Jackson had been waiting for. I could see the confirmation in his eyes, and his expression changed, revealing restrained desire. He looked at me for a few seconds, assessing the moment, before moving closer and giving me a soft kiss. But I didn't want just a kiss. I wanted something more. So I grabbed him by the back of the neck and pulled him closer, kissing him for real, just the way I wanted. His lips molded to mine with an intensity that made my heart soar. That moment was everything I had planned and more. The kiss deepened, and I could feel the chemistry between us intensifying, as if everything around us had disappeared. It was just me, him, and the desire that was finally coming true. I decided that we weren't just going to kiss. With an ardent and provocative smile, I told him that I was ready to do whatever he wanted and that I really wanted it. As soon as I'd finished talking, we started kissing madly again, lost in the intensity of that moment on the living room sofa. Every touch, every sigh was as if the passion we had repressed had finally found freedom. After we finally pulled away, still panting, he became a little worried, saying that we shouldn't have done it, that he hadn't thought through the consequences. I quickly tried to calm him down, replying that there was no turning back now. I looked him in the eye and said that I'd really enjoyed it and wanted to do it again every night. "Now you won't escape me," I joked, but with a serious tone. I tried to reassure him that I was as involved in this as he was, and that this would be our little secret. That moment was more than just passion. It was a new beginning, full of possibilities and, of course, a mystery that only the two of us would share. He seemed to calm down and let out a half smile, saying that we needed to keep a low profile when my mother was around. Taking advantage of the fact that we were in that situation together, I decided to ask him what he really wanted with my mother, considering that he was much younger than her and would soon be moving into a new apartment. He should really get a younger woman, shouldn't he? Then he looked me in the eye and asked if I wanted to be his. That statement took me by surprise, and at the same time, made me reflect on how superficial men can be. My stepfather, who until yesterday had been in love with my mother, now seemed to want to swap his wife for his daughter. This not only perplexed me, but also gave me a feeling of power. It was obvious that he was already in love with me, and that it would be easy to manipulate him. The anger and pain I felt turned into a form of revenge. I realized that I could use this situation to my advantage in a way I had never imagined. I told him that we could talk about it, but that he would have to let go of my mother. I wouldn't stay with him knowing that he was still kissing her. Raphael then asked me for a break, mentioning that he wasn't even going to return to the company where they worked. He told me that he had been offered a job at another company, where he would earn more money, and told me that if I agreed to stay with him, he would pay me back. Taking advantage of the situation, I kissed him on the lips and said I would think about it, but warned him that he should always visit me at night when my mother was asleep. After that, I went to my room, full of anticipation and happy with my plan. It was a chance to make up for the pain my mother had made me suffer all these years. During the days he stayed at home, until everything was ready in his apartment, we stayed together every night. Everything was done in secret, away from my mother's ears, and the adrenaline of living that situation only increased the intensity of what we were doing. I knew it would change everything, and the feeling of control over the situation made me even more excited. Finally, after weeks of anticipation, he moved into the apartment. A few days before the move, Jackson commented to me that things weren't going well between him and my mother. He mentioned that she was always fighting with him and sometimes swearing at him. I could hear everything from my room. Then he shared his plan: to move into the new apartment and break up with my mother once and for all. He was determined, and that intrigued me. Jackson even told me that when I wanted to stay there with him, all I had to do was text him. He even asked me to consider living in his new apartment. The idea of living this new reality alongside him excited me. What had started out as revenge was now turning into something I really wanted, and the possibility of finally having a place of my own seemed irresistible. I said I would think about it, but I made it clear that I would visit Jackson almost every day. After he moved out, my mother got worse. She started drinking more and getting even more nervous. But to be honest, I didn't care. I had finally gotten my revenge, and the idea of moving in with Jackson, who until then had been my stepfather, made me excited. I visited his new apartment countless times, and at each meeting, he asked me to consider moving in with him. Despite all this excitement, I'm still undecided. I can no longer stand staying at home with my mother, who seems increasingly lost and stressed. The situation is complicated, and I don't know exactly what to do. If you have any suggestions or advice for me, please leave them in the comments. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.